Hi, this is Gary Chartier from the Center for a Stateless Society. Welcome to ATP 101, an introduction to anarchism. This is lecture 6. So, in the assigned reading for today, the Tannehills are concerned with defensive services. Obviously, this is pretty crucial. Nobody with any kind of good sense supposes that in a stateless society, people are going to need no defensive services. Nobody supposes that everyone is well-intentioned, everyone is good-natured, there will never be violent conflicts. Okay? Anarchism is fundamentally, and I'll repeat this again before the course is over, anarchism is fundamentally a vision of peace. Anarchists are about peaceful cooperation, but that certainly doesn't mean that a stateless society is a society in which there's no conflict and no violence. People need defensive services. Now, those defensive services can obviously be provided in a variety of ways. We can imagine them being provided by professionals working on a for-profit basis, charities operating on a not-for-profit basis, co-ops operating on a not-for-profit basis, volunteers, think about the kind of extended neighborhood watch program, and obviously individual people defending themselves and their friends and family members. When I talk here about defense agencies, I have in mind all of these things. A defense agency is not just a professional for-profit service or a co-op. Any of the options I've mentioned might be covered under this heading of defense agency. Now, it's clear that in a stateless society, we're going to need various kinds of defense agencies. But the major fear that I think understandably a lot of people have, and which the Tannehills want to address in this set of readings, is that people charged with keeping peace will go to war. This is really one of the major fears that people characteristically express about life in a stateless society. If there's a state, they say, there's a central authority, then, well, there won't be wars among defense agencies. Now, there's something a little odd about this when you think about the frequency with which the defense agencies that are states go to war with each other, but never mind that. The Tannehills are certainly right. It is bad news to trust the government. If we think about ways in which governments are destructive and governments go to war, it's hardly surprising that the Tannehills suggest that these entities, entrusted with enormous power and wealth and enabled to engage in tremendous violence, these entities aren't very trustworthy. And so if somebody says, well, we really ought to trust the government, I think that's a little odd, frankly, but if somebody says that, any reason in general that you offer to trust government officials will also be a reason to trust defense agencies. And by contrast, any reason somebody offers not to trust defense agencies will also be a reason not to trust government officials. That is, if you say, look, people are going to be responsible, well, that's a claim that certainly ought to apply to people who are engaged in the voluntary provision of defensive services, just like it would be a reason to trust government officials. And if you say, well, come on, people who run private defense agencies are going to use violence for their own benefit, well, guess what? That happens repeatedly when state actors do what they do. The notion that state actors somehow abandon their prejudices and their private agendas when they become state actors is, frankly, too bizarre to be believable. So there are several reasons why I think we can be reasonably confident that defense agencies in a stateless society won't spend their time going to war with each other. So the first and most obvious is that it is costly to fight others directly. Think about the cost in personnel, hospital bills, in destroyed equipment, and so forth. It's just not cheap to run a war, even a small-scale war. Now, that's just the financial cost. But then it's clearly also costly to fight others as a matter of reputation, right? I mean, the entities that get involved in violent conflicts with each other are not characteristically thought of well by others. Your neighbors aren't going to look at you with big grins on their faces if they realize that you work for that agency that spends its day engaging in marauding and rapine and violence out in the countryside. And this isn't just a matter of individual clients losing confidence in a defense agency. Clearly they will. Individual clients aren't going to want to take advantage of the services of an agency that has extra high costs because it engages in violence. I think that's pretty clear. And they also probably just won't want to be associated in the minds of others with an agency that is seen in general as a rogue agency. But also, and this is really important, that Tannehill's emphasized, not just about individual clients, it's also about the loss of endorsement from insurance companies, which not only probably would not patronize rogue defense agencies, but would likely decline to cover individual clients who did. I mean, think about this from the standpoint of an insurance agency. There's probably no good reason to cover a client who is known to employ the services of an agency that does destructive things, because obviously the insurance company is going to have to pay out often enough to cover for the destructive losses caused by the defense agency. Also, the insurance company just isn't going to cover the defense agency itself and its cooperative members or employees or whatever. I mean, it seems to be fairly clear that there's a problem there as well. Now, obviously, it's costly to fight others in terms of long-term client loyalty. Clients have good reason not to want to endorse or be associated with firms that are belligerent. It's also costly in terms of employee loss. I mean, I think we can see this fairly clearly. Why would employees, workers, put themselves at risk of lawsuit and so forth in the course of working for a violent defense agency? I mean, understand, when you work for the state as a soldier or a police officer, you're very frequently able to escape legal liability for the destructive actions in which you engage. You get a free pass as somebody who works for the state. Obviously, that's not what we could expect in a situation in which somebody worked for a defense agency in a stateless society. That person would be liable for the harms that she or he caused, and of course the agency would also be liable for harms that it encouraged others to cause. So I think that's really crucial. Employees wouldn't want to suffer the risks associated with work for this kind of agency, and also their personal reputations would be at stake. As I suggested before, there's a problem if you're identified by your friends and neighbors as somebody who is by profession a thug.